3 taps. It was late summer and Mom let me have my friend Mike over for dinner one Saturday night. I wanted him to sleep over, but his mom wouldn't let him. I can't remember why, but I think he had to get up early that Sunday for church or something. After dinner, we played catch for a little while in my backyard. We took turns tossing a football back and forth, all the while making plans to sneak out that night. Earlier that week, we built a makeshift fort in the woods just behind my house. I found an old tarp my dad had in his tool shed along with a box of nails, one of his hammers, and a shovel. Before long, we had a pretty cool fort tucked under a pile of leaves. You would never know it was there. We hid it really good. The sneak-out plan was something like this. Mike was going to sneak out of his house first, and then come and get me around 1:30 in the morning. We figured everybody in his house and my house would be long asleep before that time, so it would be the safest time to do it. If he didn't show up by 2, the plan would be called off, assuming that someone was still up at his house, or God forbid he got caught trying to sneak out. Once he got to my place, he would tap 3 times on the side window of my bedroom, and then I would head down the hall to the den and then slip out the sliding glass door. It was the quietest door in our house. Once I was out, we were going to go drink some beers we stashed in the fort. Anyways, I suppose it was around 11 when everyone went to bed at my house, and I lie in my bed staring at the ceiling, looking at the still shadows of the trees just outside my front windows. My room was dark, but the street light across the road was much like a nightlight with the shades up. I would usually pull them down to block out the light, but my front windows were open. The nights were getting cooler, and my folks wanted to save some money on the power bill by not using the air conditioner. My side window didn't have a screen, so it would remain shut year-round, making it the perfect window to tap on for Mike. Every once in a while, I would turn my head and have a peek at the alarm clock on the nightstand. 12:10 in neon red shined back at me. I began to daydream and started to drift off to sleep, but I would always catch myself just before I went all the way under. It wouldn't be long now till Mike was over, and I was getting excited and a little worried we might get caught. I rested my eyes again and quickly opened them. Only 12:59 this time. The still shadows now danced on the ceiling as a breeze picked up outside. It was getting chilly in my room now, so I pulled the blankets in tighter. I really wanted to go to sleep. Suddenly, I sprang upright in my bed and glanced at the alarm clock. It was 3:10. I fell asleep and I missed Mike. It was freezing in my room, so I got out of bed to close the front windows, and that's when I saw him. I looked out to the street, and just under the light stood a silhouette of a kid that looked like Mike. He was just standing there looking at my house. Why would he just stand there in the middle of the road like that? Suddenly, there was 3 loud and quick taps on my side window, and I quickly turned to the noise. Then I saw something move, so I turned back to the street, and the figure was gone. I rushed to the side window and carefully pulled back the shade, and there was no one there. I totally freaked out and jumped back into bed, pulling the covers over my head and wrapping myself up like a ball. I was scared to death. I closed my eyes as hard as I could and clenched my blankets tight. I was so scared, frozen in fear. I pulled the covers down harder, closed my eyes tighter. "Oh, please go away," I whispered a prayer, and now even louder than the taps before. Just then my mom rushed through the bedroom door. "What's going on in here, Jack?" she demanded. She clicked on the light as I pulled the covers off my head. "I don't know, I keep hearing stuff outside." "It's freezing in here," she yelled at me. She hurried to the front windows and closed them and stomped back to the door. "You get to bed, young man. It's almost 5 o'clock in the morning, Jack." I looked sharply at the alarm clock. What? I couldn't believe it. It was 4:45. Where did the time go? My mom shut the light off and closed the door. "Go to bed, Jack. I mean it," her voice fading as she walked down the hall back to her bedroom. I pulled the covers back over my head and listened hard for the taps on the window, but it never happened again. Somehow I eventually managed to fall asleep in the wee hours of dawn. I woke up around 10 that morning to the smell of breakfast and a sun-filled room. My nightmare was finally over. I wiped the sleep out of my eyes and made my way down the hall to the kitchen. My dad was reading the Sunday paper and looked up at me chewing on a piece of bacon. "You know anything about Mike running away?" he bluntly asked. I was taken back by the question. He ran away? Then my mom butted in while placing a plate of eggs and bacon in front of me. Mike's mom called this morning, wanted to know if he was over here, and then she told me he wasn't in his room this morning. My mother looked at me trying to get to some truth. "I don't know where he is, Mom, but he would have told me if he was running away or something." My dad was giving me his stare down, trying to shake me too. "Nothing funny going on, Jack, right?" he asked with his curious eye. "No, sir, nothing's going on, Dad. I don't know where Mike is." "All right, then," giving me one last look and then going back to his reading. I kept my head buried in the plate before me, huffing down the scrambled eggs and bacon strips, and every once in a while I washed it all down with some orange juice. My mind raced and wondered about Mike. I couldn't tell my folks what happened. First, I would get in big trouble, and second, they would never believe me. Sure enough, Mike was missing. By Sunday evening, the Chesapeake police were over at Mike's house. Mrs. Johnson was trying desperately to file a missing persons report, but the officers told her it was too early to be thinking that way, and that her son would probably show up at any time. "Kids do this type of thing all the time," they assured her. As soon as the police left, Mike's mom called everyone in the neighborhood she hadn't called already, and told them Mike was missing and to be on the lookout for him. She was especially concerned about his diabetes and the medication he should be taking. All I could think was there was no way Mike ran away. No way he would have done that. He would have told me. I was one of his best friends. That night, as I sat in bed, all I could think about was the night before. I cried myself to sleep in fear and in sorrow. I couldn't explain what happened, but Mike was gone for sure, and the reality started to set in. 2 days later, on Tuesday, Mrs. Johnson filed a missing persons report with the police, and by the end of the day, several search parties searched the neighborhood and the woods in the back of our house. I was sure they were going to find the fort Mike and I made, but they didn't. We camouflaged it so good. They probably thought it was just a huge pile of leaves, and that's if they saw it at all. That night and the following days turned up nothing, not even a clue. A week went by, then 2. I tried to get my friends Ronnie and Greg to go with me to the fort one day, but nobody wanted to go in the woods. Lots of kids wouldn't even come out to play. Everyone in the neighborhood was still shaken up and Mike was still missing. The searches were called off and the police still had no leads. I couldn't believe Mike was gone. The whole thing was just so surreal to me. I often wondered if he got kidnapped on the way to my house that night we were going to try to sneak out. I should have told my mom. Maybe that would have helped the police. I just couldn't risk it, though. They would find out about the beers in the fort, and I would be in huge trouble. I could just see it now, too. The whole neighborhood would think I was trying to make something up to get attention. I just shook it off, and as each day passed, living with the secret got a little easier. School started in mid-September, and for a while the kids talked about Mike. Most of them laughed about it and made jokes. Some stories about seeing his ghost were being made up. All of it was just rumors. Nobody really knew what happened to Mike. He was just gone. Autumn had come, and by now most of the leaves had fallen from the trees, and everything had become gray and bare. I could just see the top of the tarp on the fort a few hundred feet in the woods from my backyard. The wind must have blown the leaves off of it. I decided to go in and check it out. I hadn't seen the fort in almost 2 months, and those beers should still be inside, nice and cold. I slowly made my way up the small path, and as I drew closer, a faint hint of death was in the air. Must be a raccoon or maybe a dead fox, I thought. I got closer and closer to the fort, and the smell was becoming putrid. I could barely stand it anymore. I covered my nose with my jacket sleeve to try and block it out. I finally made it up to the fort entrance. Slowly and carefully, I began pulling the tarp. Then the wind whispered in my ear.
"Where were you, Jack?" I tapped 3 times.
I didn't dare look in the direction the voice came from. Instead, I bolted in the opposite direction back to my house. Straightway, I ran through the door and locked it. My mom came rushing to me. I broke down and I told her what had just happened and what happened that night when Mike went missing and how we were going to sneak out. She called the police, and soon after the woods were filled with cops. They put up a yellow police line around the fort and closed the entrance to the woods. News reporters lined the streets with their big satellite trucks, and they were trying to get us to do interviews. Mike's family came over for a little while, and everything was just a mess. The whole world had been turned upside down. By the morning, the police chief held a news briefing explaining that the body of a boy had been found in the woods, and the family identified his remains as their son Mike Johnson, the boy who's been missing since late summer. Later on, Mike's autopsy and his toxicology report determined that Mike's death was the result of complications with diabetes. My mom would eventually tell me that alcohol from drinking the beers and Mike's extremely low blood sugar caused him to have a seizure. He then slipped into what they call a diabetic coma, and he died because he didn't get medical treatment. I felt really bad, and I blamed myself for a long time. My mom told me that it was a freak accident and it wasn't my fault. How could I have known? I didn't even know he had diabetes. She was right, but still, maybe if I told her about our plans, somebody would have gone to the fort and found him. Weeks turned into months, and soon it was summer again, and on one late summer night, I had my front windows open. Mom and Dad were trying to save money on their electrical bill, but not using the air conditioner, and wouldn't you know it,